Okay, first and foremost, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'asham, Yahushai, Ba'asham, Rakakwadash, and double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Today we'll be covering Daniel chapter 11, verses 28 through 32. In the last video, we went over verses 25 through 27, and those pretty much just talked about how Antiochus Epiphanes, he makes his first surge into Egypt, and he defeats Ptolemy Philometor and sets him up as a puppet ruler, and they make some agreements, even though inwardly in their minds they weren't going to stand by those agreements. So, after Antiochus' first voyage into Egypt, he's returning, and that's what we get to in verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So after Antiochus had taken over certain portions of Egypt and set Ptolemy up as a puppet king, he returned into his land with great riches, right? Because, he had defeated them and, of course, took their riches. And his heart shall be against the Holy Covenant, which the Holy Covenant being Israel, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. And once again, this was after Antiochus's first voyage into Egypt. So now let's get the account of that in the book of Maccabees. First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 16. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of two realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy. All right, remember, this being that first surge into Egypt, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt, but Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof, which is what we're reading back in verse 28. Then shall he return into his land with great riches. Right, so he took their spoils, he returned with their riches. Verse 20. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 140th year, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. And what do we read here? Then he shall return into the land with great riches, and in his heart shall be against the holy covenant, which is Israel, and shall do exploits and return to his own land. And that's what we're about to read about. And entered proudly into the sanctuary, and took away the golden altar, and the candlestick of light, and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the shewbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crown, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre, and spoken very proudly. Right, so, once again, going back to Daniel 11, then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. We just read about the exploits that he did, and after that, it says what? And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land. So, after his first voyage to Egypt, he's basically going to come to Jerusalem, commit these exploits, and then goes back to his own land. On to verse 29. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So it says at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south. So he's going to come back again toward the south, being Egypt, and this was his second voyage into Egypt. but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. And this is because when Antiochus came back to Egypt, it didn't go how it did the first time, and things weren't the same as when he left. After the first voyage, he left Ptolemy VI as a puppet king in Memphis, but also at that time, Ptolemy basically had a falling out with his brother, who was declared the sole king of Egypt. But while Antiochus was gone, they pretty much, they had pretty much rekindled and joined back forces. So Ptolemy VI basically did away with his agreement with Antiochus. And this is what Antiochus had came back to when he came back to Egypt. So it wasn't, it wasn't going to be as the former or as the latter. Verse 30, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So it says, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and these ships of Kittim were the Romans, or the Roman embassy led by Gaius Popilius Laenas that came to defend against Antiochus after the Ptolemies. They basically appealed to the Roman Senate for help. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Once again, the holy covenant being Israel. So now let's get the secular history on this and how those ships of Kittim came against him. Here we have the Syrian Wars. 6th Syrian War. Because remember, this is, for the most part dealing with that 6th Syrian War. Here. In Antiochus' absence, so, when he withdrew from Egypt after the first voyage, Ptolemy VI and his brother Ptolemy Physcon were reconciled, possibly after a brief civil struggle. Antiochus, angered at his loss of control over the king, invaded again in 168 BC. The Egyptians sent to Rome asking for help, and the Senate dispatched Gaius Popilius Laenas to Alexandria. All right, and this is that, these are those ships of Kittim that came against Antiochus. Meanwhile, a Seleucid fleet seized Cyprus, and Antiochus' army took Memphis again. While at Memphis, he even issued an official decree as Egyptian king. The Ptolemaic armies failed to offer any major field battles, instead staying fortified in garrisons. Antiochus was not prepared to march on the capital of Alexandria again. At Eleusis, on the outskirts of Alexandria, he met Popilius Laenas, with whom he had been friends during his stay in Rome. But instead of a friendly welcome, Popilius offered the king an ultimatum from the Roman Senate. He must evacuate Egypt and Cyprus immediately. Rome had only just recently defeated the Macedonians at the Battle of Pydna, potentially freeing up armies with which it could credibly threaten the Seleucids. Antiochus begged to have time to consider, but Popilius drew a circle around him in the sand with his cane and told him to decide before he stepped outside it. Antiochus chose to obey the Roman ultimatum to avoid a new Roman-Seleucid war, a retreat that Polybius described as personally humiliating for Antiochus. The day of Eleusis ended the 6th Syrian War and Antiochus' hopes of conquering Egyptian territory. Right, and we can also get the account of this here, dealing with Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Jump right here. In 168 BC, Antiochus led a second attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus. Before he reached Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Popilius Laenas. Those ships of Kittim, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus or reconsider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. Slovakia. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, "Before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I can take back to the Roman Senate." This replied, Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the circle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. Weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then did Popilius agree to shake hands with him. Ancient sources and traditional historiography describe this day of Eleusis as a great humiliation for Antiochus IV that unhinged him for a time. All right, so going back to verse 30, for the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant, so shall he do. So when he returned after that second time, he took his anger out on Israel. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. All right, and this is going into when he was doing these exploits, Antiochus, he pretty much had help from the wicked Israelites, but namely dealing with Menelaus, but along with the other wicked Israelites that were with him. So now let's get the account of that in the book of Maccabees, Second Maccabees chapter 5. Second Maccabees chapter 5, verse 1. Now, Slovakia, about the same time Antiochus prepared his second voyage into Egypt, and then it happened that through all the city, for the space almost of 40 days, there were seen horsemen running in the air, in a cloth of gold, and armed with lances like a band of soldiers, and troops of horsemen in an array, encountering and running one against another, with shaking of shields and multitude of pikes, and drawing of swords, and casting of darts, and glittering of gold ornaments, and hardness of all sorts. Wherefore every man prayed that apparition might turn good. And, so they basically saw angels. Verse 5. Now when there was gone forth a false rumor, as though Antiochus had been dead, and so this is while Antiochus is gone into Egypt, Jason took at the least 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city. And they that were upon the walls being put back, and the city at length taken, Menelaus fled into the castle. So while Antiochus was gone, there was a rumor that he had died. So Jason saw this as an opportunity to come and take over Jerusalem. But Jason slew his own citizens without mercy, not considering that to get the day of them of his own nation would be a most unhappy day for him, but thinking they had been his enemies and not his countrymen whom he conquered. So, he didn't look at Jake as his brothers, but as enemies, and was killing them as such, as he was taking over. Howbeit, for all this he obtained not the principality, but at the last received shame for the reward of his treason, and fled again into the country of the Ammonites. So, he wasn't even able to take over, and he ended up fleeing back in the land of Ammon. Verse 8. In the end, therefore, he had an unhappy return, being accused before Aradus, the king of the Arabians, fleeing from city to city, pursued of all men, hated as a forsaker of the laws, and being had in abomination as an open enemy of his country and countrymen, he was cast out into Egypt. So Jason basically became a fugitive on the run. Thus he that had driven many out of their country perished in a strange land, retiring to the Lacedaemonians, and thinking there to find succor by reason of his kindred. Now it says retiring to the Lacedaemonians and thinking there to find succor by the reason of his kindred, because these Lacedaemonians were the Spartans who were actually Jews. That's why he's pretty much thinking that maybe he could find shelter among them. Verse 10. And he that had cast out many unburied had none to mourn for him, nor any solemn funerals at all, nor sepulture with his fathers. And this is dealing with Jason. Now when this that was done came to the king's car, he thought that Judea had revolted, whereupon removing out of Egypt in a furious mind, he took the city by force of arms. Right, so here it is. Antiochus, he just had to deal with that Roman embassy and Popilius, that whole Popilius situation, that's already got him pissed off. And then he gets news that to him sounds like, there's a revolt in Judea. That's just adding more fuel to the fire. So of course Antiochus, he's really about to be fuming. And that's why it says, whereupon removing out of Egypt in a furious mind, he took the city by force of arms. And as we read in verse 30, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant, which is Israel. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So now let's read some of the things that he did against Israel when he returned, in that angered state of mind. Now when this that was done came to the king's car, he thought that Judea had revolted, whereupon removing out of Egypt in a furious mind, he took the city by force of arms, and commanded his men of war not to spare such as they met, and to slay such as went up upon the houses. Thus there was killing of young and old, making away of men, women, and children, slaying of virgins and infants. And there were destroyed within the space of 3 whole days 80,000, so 80,000, whereof 40,000 were slain in the conflict, and no fewer sold than slain. Yet was he not content with this, but presumed to go into the most holy temple of all the world, Menelaus, the traitor to the laws, into his own country, being his guide. So Menelaus was the one guiding Antiochus into the temple. And that's why we read here in verse 30, so shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So, Menelaus was what? The traitor to the laws into his own country. So him and the other wicked Israelites who were with him had forsaken the holy covenant, and they were that intelligence that pretty much helped Antiochus. Verse 16, and taking the holy vessels with polluted hands and with profane hands, pulling down the things that were dedicated by other kings to the augmentation and glory and honor of the place, he gave them away. And so haughty was Antiochus in mind, that he considered not that the Lord was angry for a while for the sins of them that dwell in the city, and therefore his eye was not upon the place. Meaning that Antiochus didn't consider, that the only reason he was able to do what he was doing to Jerusalem was because the Lord was the one that was angry. And because the Lord was angry, his eye was not upon the place. So he allowed Antiochus to do what he was doing. Verse 18, for had they not been formerly wrapped in many sins, so if Israel, weren't committing all those sins that they committed, this man, as soon as he had come, had forthwith been scourged and put back from his presumption, as Heliodorus was, whom Seleucus the king sent to view his treasury. Right, so if it wasn't for all the, the sins that Israel had committed, as soon as Antiochus pulled up, he would have got that Heliodorus treatment. And we know what happened to Heliodorus. When he came to the treasury trying to pretty much take the money, the Lord had angels nearly beat him to death. And so, that's what would have happened to Antiochus the second he showed up, if it wasn't for, the Lord having this be the judgment playing out on Israel for their sins. But it says, nevertheless, the Most High did not choose the people for the place's sake, but the place for the people's sake. And therefore the place itself that was partaker with them of the adversity that happened to the nation did afterward communicate in the benefit sent from the Lord. And as it was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty, so again, the great Lord being reconciled, it was set up with all glory. And so when Antiochus had carried out of the temple 1,800 talents, he departed in all haste unto Antiochia, weening in his pride to make the land navigable and the sea passable by foot. Such was the haughtiness of his mind. All right, so that's what we read dealing with verse 30. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him, that being the Roman embassy and Gaius Popilius Laenas. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. That whole situation had Antiochus angry. He came back and took it out on Israel. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. And when he came back to take his anger out on Israel, he pretty much had help from Menelaus and those other wicked Israelites. But it doesn't just stop there. So continuing, verse 22, and he left governors to vex the nation at Jerusalem, Philip for his country of Phrygian, and for manners more barbarous than he that set him there. And at Gerizim, Andronicus, and besides Menelaus, who worse than all the rest, bearing heavy hand over the citizens, having a malicious mind against his countrymen the Jews. He sent also that detestable ringleader Apollonius with an army of 22,000, so 22,000, commanding him to slay all those that were in their best age and to sell the women in the younger sort, who coming to Jerusalem and pretending peace, did forbear till the holy day of the Sabbath. When taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves. And so he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons slew great multitudes. Right, and this what we read here dealing with Apollonius, we also get the account of this event in the book of 1 Maccabees. And jump down here to verse 29. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 verse 29. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Judah, and that chief collector being Apollonius, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude. Remember, what do we read? He came with 22,000, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. And remember that. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city and smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Israel. Right, so there's parallels with this and what we read in 2 Maccabees. And the main one being this right here, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city. Now let's once again go back and read here. He sent also that detestable ringleader Apollonius with an army of 22,000, so that chief collector and his multitude, commanding him to slay all those that were in their best age, and to sell the women in the younger sort, who come into Jerusalem and pretending peace. Right, he was pretending, so it was deceit. Did forbear to the holy day of the Sabbath. When taking the Jews keeping holy day, he commanded his men to arm themselves. And so he slew all them that were gone to the celebrating of the Sabbath, and running through the city with weapons slew great multitudes. And this is speaking on that same event as what we just read in 1 Maccabees. We're going back now, moving on to verse 31. And arms shall not stand on his part, and and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Now, it says, an arm shall stand on his part, and these arms, were the armies or that multitude who were sent by Antiochus, his chief collector, Apollonius. Remember that multitude, he came with the 22,000, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So now let's read about, when they did those things. Back to 1 Maccabees. First Maccabees chapter 1 verse 29. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the city of Judah, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude. Remember Apollonius, and his multitude, and make peaceable words, and spake peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city, and smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire, and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took they captive, and possessed the cattle. They builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. They stored it also with the armor and victuals, and when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there. And so they became a sore snare, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary, and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled it. Which is what? They defiled it, and it's polluting the sanctuary, like we read here in verse 31. And arm shall stand on its part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They polluted the sanctuary by defiling it with the blood of innocent. And so much that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. Whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers, and became strange to those that were born in her. And her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. Once again, going back to verse 31, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Verse 40, as had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yeah, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people. What do we just read? And forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and they shall profane the Sabbaths and festival days. Here, and they shall place Slakia, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. So we just read how they took away the daily sacrifice, they forbid it. But verse 46, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people. What? They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. It's right there. Set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. In the selfsame manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. And then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, everyone that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wherefore they could flee for succor. Now the 15th day of the month Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar. What do we read here? And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. They set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the city of Judah on every side. So, it's right there. Because now dealing with verse 32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their power shall be strong and do exploits. So, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. So, those wicked Israelites who pretty much sold out to the bribes and promises of Antiochus. But the people that do know their power, do know their God, shall be strong and do exploits. And this is dealing with the Israelites who pretty much stood firm and still didn't forsake the laws and the Holy Covenant, even though, they pretty much outlawed our laws. And if we keep reading, we will get to them. And burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law which they found, they burnt them with fire. And whosoever was found with any of the book of the testament, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was what? That they should put him to death. Thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice unto the idol altar, which was upon the altar of the Most High. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised. And they hanged the infants about their necks, and rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved, and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean, wherefore the rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meats, that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died. And these were those Israelites who knew their power, who knew their God, and shall be strong and do exploits. But that was also, dealing with the Maccabees, which we'll cover in the next video. But that's pretty much it on these verses. So a quick recap. Verse 28, then shall he return into his land with great riches, right? Because, he defeated the Ptolemies, took their riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant. And he shall do exploits and return to his own land, right? When he came back, he did those exploits in Jerusalem. At the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south. So that second time he entered Egypt, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter, right? Because not only were things different from when he left, he also, things didn't go as how he thought they would, how they went the first time. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him, that being that Roman embassy, and Gaius Popilius Laenas. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant, right? So, that caused him to be angered, and he came back and took that anger out on Israel. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, right? When he did so, he had help from the wicked Israelites, namely Menelaus. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate, going into his chief collector Apollonius, and how him and his multitude committed these acts. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. Those wicked Israelites who pretty much fell for the bribes and promises of Antiochus, and sold out. But the people that do know their power shall be strong and do exploits, dealing with the Maccabees, but also the Israelites who stood firm in the midst of all this adversity. So with that being said, once more, I would like to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, and Shalom.